Everybody sit. Amen. Well, I grew up in a family that we were really close. My parents were pastors for pretty much my entire life and all of my younger brother's life. We did not have a perfect family by any stretch of the imagination, but 30 years later, my parents are still leading a church. They're still in the ministry, still pastoring. My brother and his wife are leading the largest Chi Alpha in Tennessee, and I am here leading the greatest church known to man. Thought you guys would like that. And so much of the credit for any success that my brother or I have had in our lives at all, in our ministry or in our personal lives, goes to my parents for raising us the right way and for doing that on purpose. Family was and is important, really important in our house. I remember whenever I was growing up, we had a busy family, and my brother and I both played sports, and my dad was pastoring by the time we got a little bit older. He was lead pastoring, and we were just busy all the time. But we always my parents always took special care that several nights a week, they made sure that we were at home for dinner, and we had family dinner, right? Everybody didn't just run into the kitchen and get whatever was convenient and run back and sit down in front of a TV, but mom and or dad cooked almost every night of my childhood. This happened. Mom and or dad would cook, and we would stop watching TV, we would stop playing outside, we'd stop doing homework, anything that we were doing, we would stop that. We would come, we would sit down around the table, and we had family dinner. And we talked, right? And then we didn't have cell phones. My brother and I didn't even have phones. We were well into our teenage years before we got phones. We still had a landline phone back then, and it didn't ring. By that point, nobody was calling those anymore except for telemarketers. And so we ignored all of that stuff, and we just sat down together, and we had a meal as a family, and we talked. And I can remember some of the conversations that we had at family dinner. I can still remember those things vividly in my mind. I can remember us telling our parents what we wanted to do and what our aspirations were, and our parents encouraging us in those things. I can still remember the words that my parents spoke over us at family dinner. We sat, and my brother and I had an opportunity to talk with my parents. We also had what my dad affectionately called family meetings. Now, at family dinner, me and my brother got to talk. At family meetings, me and my brother did no talking, right? Family meeting usually meant somebody or a group of people in this house have been doing something wrong, and we're going to meet as a family until we get it fixed. We're going to meet until we get it right. So we had family meetings where we didn't talk, but we listened. We played in the backyard as a family. We went to church together as a family. We did sports together as a family. And whenever I was growing up, I just assumed that it was like that for everyone, because when you grow up, you just assume that the way you grow up, that's the normal way. This is just how everyone lives. And so I assumed that it was like that for everyone. Everyone just had parents who loved them and who invested a huge amount of time into their lives. And now that I have kids, I realize that having a family like the family that I had whenever I was growing up never happens on accident. It takes a lot of intentionality and effort to lead a family like the ones that my parents led. Because sometimes, mom and dad, if you still have kids at home, you know that I'm about to tell the truth. Sometimes it's easier to just say, you take these pizza rolls and you go to that room, and the baby's been crying all night, so he's going to get an early bedtime, and we're going to give him a bottle and put him in the crib, and mom and dad are just going to sit down and relax in the peace and quiet for a little bit. Okay, nobody else does that. We should stop doing that immediately. We can be honest and say it takes a lot of intentionality to lead a family like the one that I described. It takes a lot of intentionality to raise children who are productive members of the family of God. To raise children who are productive members of society. That does not just happen by accident. We do it on purpose. We do it by living lives as a family. And one of the things that our family did together was that we had the occasional family game night. Family game night. And I, as competitive as I am, and you would be hard-pressed to find anyone who is more competitive in life than me, except for maybe my friend Sean Caldwell. He's pretty competitive. You'd be hard-pressed to find anyone who's more competitive than me. But as competitive as I am, you know what I don't remember about family game night? I don't remember all the times I won and all the times I lost. I'm sure that I won some, and I'm sure that I lost some. I probably won more than I lost, okay? But that's not what was important to me about family game night. What was important and what I remember is that I spent time building relationship with my family, with the people that I loved. I can remember playing those old games that we still love to play today. And today we're going to start a new series. This is going to be a long series. We're going to start a new series today called The Games of Life. The Games of Life. And throughout this series, we're going to look at about 11 different games that we used to play whenever we were kids. And they're good games, and as long as we don't take them too seriously, they're just fun. But the problem is that now that we're old and now that we're grown, sometimes we treat life like the games that we used to play when we were kids. Each week we're going to talk about a different game, the ideas that game teaches us, and what God has to say about those ideas. And since we're talking about the games of life, it seemed only fitting that today we were going to start out by talking about the game of life. Show of hands, how many of you guys have ever played the game of life? Okay, most of you guys, awesome. So I won't have to describe in a lot of depth exactly what the game of life is or what it's all about. But today we are going to talk about the game of life. And as with so many of the games that we're going to talk about, it's harmless and it's a fun game to play. But here's what you got to get. If we adopted the principles of the way that we played the game of life, we adopted those principles into our lives as adults, then we would be in trouble. I can remember the very first time that I ever played the game of life. I was with a group of friends. I was over at one of my friends' house, and I remember having fun. It was a lot of fun to choose whether you were going to go to college or whether you were going to go straight and start making money and start working, or how many kids you would have, or what career you would have. And now in the newer games of life, they have like special vacations and luxurious careers that you can choose from. I even think this one says adopt pets, as if that would be a goal for anyone to do in their life. Adopt pets. Will you bring home a kitten or a puppy? Maybe one of each. Lord bless you if you bring home one of each. It was a fun game. But the way that you win the game of life was not by making the most friends, right? It was not about how many kids you put out into society that were good and wholesome and smart and moral. It's not how you won the game of life. The way that you won the game of life wasn't by who had the most fun playing the game of life. Do you know how you win the game of life? It's not by who finishes first, and it's not by who finishes last. The way that you win this game, the way that you win the board game of life is who has the most money at the end of their life. Who has the most money and who has the most stuff. Now, I'm most definitely not I'm not, pitching any big conspiracy theory or anything like that today. I have absolutely nothing against this board game, the game of life. But at the same time, what are we teaching our 8-year-old kids? That to win at the game of life, all that you have to do is get the most stuff. Whoever has the most money at the end of this thing, they're going to be the winner. And whoever has the least amount of money, they're going to be the loser. What are we teaching them? We're teaching them that to win at life, what life is all about is collecting the most stuff and the most money. That's fine for a board game, but as a culture, we've taken that idea and we're still applying it to our real lives decades later. We approach life with the idea that the way to win at life is to have the most money and the newest cars and the biggest houses. And at the end of it all, if I can just have the most stuff, then I will win at the game of life. I'm not against stuff. I'm not against money. In fact, I'm for having a healthy amount of both of those things. But the way that I will decide my level of success in real life has very little to do with the way that I would win the board game of life. I want to spend some time this morning talking about the life of Joseph. For most of his story, Joseph lived a life that most people would have considered not winning. And I think that we can learn from Joseph about how to really win at the game of life. Now, we are going to read a lot of scripture today. We're going to have a lot of text today, and we're going to break it up with just learning some things about what Joseph obviously knew about how to win at the game of life. Turn to Genesis chapter number 37. We're going to begin in verses 3 and 4. Genesis 37, verses 3 and 4. I'm going to go fast today, so you guys are going to have to listen fast. Genesis 37, 3 and 4, what can we learn about the life of Joseph, about how we are going to win at the game of life? Genesis 37, 3 and 4. Now Israel, this isn't talking about the nation here, it's talking about the man, Jacob. Now Israel, that's Jacob, loved Joseph more than any other of his sons, because he was the son of his old age, and he made him a robe of many colors. That's one of the things that we know about Joseph, right? Joseph had the robe of many colors given to him by Jacob, his dad, because his dad just, pretty openly loved him more than he loved any of his other brothers. Verse number 4, but when his brothers saw that their father loved him more than all his brothers, they hated him and could not speak peacefully to him. Not everyone will be happy when you are favored. Not everyone will be happy when you are blessed. Not everyone will be happy when you succeed. Sometimes your success will cause others to get salty. Can I say that? Okay. I said it anyway. Here's what I want to encourage you to do this morning. Even though God's favor on your life will make other people not like you, live in the favor of God anyway. Even though having success and walking in success will make other people lie about you, we're going to see that in the story, and you'll be rejected. Walk in the success that God has said that you could walk in anyway. Walk in your blessing anyway. Live a life that God has laid out for you, no matter what man has to say. Because as we'll learn through this story, that when the Father decides that you are blessed, you can walk in that blessing no matter what man says about it. But you have to know going in, not everyone will rejoice when you reach the next level. And if you're prepared for it going in, whenever you celebrate and they criticize you because you're celebrating, you can brush it off because you were ready for what was going to happen. It should not take you by surprise when you have success in your life and not everyone is there cheering you on. right? Not everyone will be happy when you live in favor. And as long as you know that going into life, then you can continue on living out the life that God has for you to live. Let's jump down a couple of verses. Genesis 37 still. We're going to pick back up in verse number 9. Joseph was a dreamer. Verse number 9 says, "Then he dreamed another dream and told it to his brothers and said, 'Behold, I have dreamed another dream. Behold, the sun, the moon, and 11 stars,'" he had 11 brothers, "'were bowing down to me.' But when he told this to his father and his brothers, his father rebuked him and said to him, 'What is this dream that you have dreamed? Shall I and your mother and your brothers indeed come to bow ourselves to the ground before you?' And his brothers," verse number 11, "and his brothers were jealous of him, but his father kept the saying in his mind." Joseph is a great example for us. And in this case, Joseph is a really great example of what not to do. God gave Joseph a dream that promoted him above the ones who were around him. And Joseph made the mistake of sharing that dream with people who did not truly love him. Just because someone is in your circle does not mean that they will celebrate with you. That means that not everyone needs to know where God told you that you were going, because not everyone is going to make the trip with you. God gives us layers of friends in our lives. God gives us layers of friends in our lives. And some of the people are good people. There's nothing wrong with them. They're not malicious toward you. Some of them are good people. They love Jesus. They're following Jesus. Jesus most definitely loves them. But they are not meant to be on your inner circle. And others are meant to be closer. And still others are meant to be closer. And the closer and closer people get to you, the less room for people there will be on every subsequent circle. If we all lined up in a big circle in the room today, and we were all shoulder to shoulder, and there was one person in the middle, and those people represented the circle of people that are in their life, and we were all shoulder to shoulder, as tight as we could be in that circle, and we said, okay, everybody move in. Everybody take 3 steps in. Do you know what would happen as people got closer and closer to the person who that circle represented? Not everyone would be able to fit in the circle anymore. That's okay. That doesn't mean that the people who are on the outside parts of the circle are bad people. It does not mean that you won't need them, because you need to have acquaintances. You need to have connections. People who are not in your inner circle, but that you can reach out to. You can have a relationship with them, and you can use them as resources in your life, and they in turn can use you as a resource for their life. But just because they're valuable does not mean that they need to be all the way on your inner circle. The closer it gets to you, the fewer people who can fit. So you'll have to go to the deep places, the divine places, with a small circle of people who God designed to go with you. We start running into a problem when we start blabbing the promises of God for our lives to people who are not willing to pay the price to see those promises come to pass. I'm going to say it again because that was a mouthful. When you're in the center of the circle, there's only about 3 or 4 people who can fit around you. They're the people who deserve to have the deep secrets, the divine secrets, the places where God has called you to go. And you will get in trouble when you start screaming the promises of God to the people who are in the outer circle, because they are not supposed to be making that trip with you. What was the mistake that Joseph made? He yelled out the promise of God. He screamed the promise of God. I'm going to be elevated. But he screamed it to the very people who he was going to be elevated over. And anytime you do that and those people do not have your true best interests at heart, they don't actually have a love for you and what God has called you to do. Anytime you do that, you will always get resistance. There are levels of people, there are levels of circle in your life. If you want to win the game of life, you got to put the right people at every level of your circle. And then you have to honor that level that they belong to by sharing what God is doing in and through your life in level appropriate ways. The story continues on. His brothers sell him into slavery. We're not going to read that part of the text because we're really not going to be focused today as much on what happens to Joseph, because a lot of bad things happen to Joseph. We're really not going to be as focused today on what happens to Joseph as we are in how he reacts to what happens. Just like the board game of life, sometimes there's a little spinner. This is how you play, and you spin the wheel. And sometimes you spin the wheel, and it says 4, and you go 4 moves, and the 4th one from where you are is not a place where you want to be. Right? But unless you're an infant or a toddler, you don't get to respin. Unless you're a baby and your parents are just letting you play however you want, you don't get to respin. You have to deal with where you landed in the game of life. And that is how it is in real life. Sometimes we're going to land in places where we do not want to be. We're going to wish that we had a respin, but we don't get respins because we're not babies. We're not spiritual infants anymore. So we just are where we are right now. And we got to learn how to take what life gives us, good and bad. We got to learn how to take what life gives us and make the best of that situation. So we're not going to talk about all the things that happened to Joseph, but we're going to talk about how Joseph reacted to those things. So his brothers sell him into slavery. Genesis 39, we're going to move over a couple chapters. Genesis 39, beginning in verse number 1. You got to make the best of situations that you're put in, even when the situations are bad. Now Joseph had been brought down to Egypt, and Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, the captain of the guard, an Egyptian, had bought him from the Ishmaelites who had brought him down there. Verse number 2, the Lord was with Joseph, and he became a successful man, and he was in the house of his Egyptian master. His master saw that the Lord was with him, and that the Lord caused all that he did to succeed in his hand. So Joseph found favor in his sight and attended him, and he made him overseer of his house and put him in charge of all that he had. From the time he made him overseer in his house and over all that he had, the Lord blessed the Egyptian's house for Joseph's sake. The blessing of the Lord was on all that he had in house and field. Verse number 6. So he left all that he had in Joseph's charge, and because of him, he had no concern about anything but the food he ate. Now Joseph was handsome in form and appearance. In the seasons where life has given you the absolute worst that it has to offer, because that's where Joseph was. You understand? We're just reading through a story, but if you understand that this actually happened to someone who did nothing wrong, but he was sold into slavery by the people who should have loved him in life the most, by the people who should have made sure that he was always taken care of, the youngest of all the brothers. And all the brothers had such a hatred for him that they sold him into slavery and told his father that he had died. That's about the worst that life can give you. Even in the seasons of life, when we get the worst that life has to offer, when you remain faithful to God, God will bless you, even in the times of bondage. Even in the rough seasons, even in the dark seasons, God can and will bless you. He was blessed, Joseph was favored, and he had success in all that he did, even though the season that he was living in was hard. If life is won and lost by having the most stuff, then everybody would say Joseph is losing at this point. But what God had given Joseph was influence whenever Joseph was in a position where he should have had absolutely no influence. God was still using him even in the hard season. Let's pick up in verse number 7. And after a time, his master's wife cast her eyes on Joseph and said, "Lie with me." But he refused and said to his master's wife, "Behold, because of me my master has no concern about anything in the house, and he has put everything that he has in my charge. He is not greater in this house than I am, nor has he kept anything back from me except you, because you are his wife. How then can I do this great wickedness and sin against God?" And as she spoke to Joseph day after day, he would not listen to her, to lie beside her, or to be with her. When you're doing life the right way, the enemy will tempt you to compromise your convictions for convenience. You're going to a place, and what the enemy will offer you is a shortcut. Where was Joseph going? What had Joseph been promised? He had been promised everything. The moon, the stars, the sun, they all bow down to him. Joseph had been promised to have everything. And he had almost everything. Right? He was so close to having everything. Even Joseph said, "My master has given me everything in this house except for you, because you are his wife." And what she was offering him was, you can actually have it all. You can have it all right now. There's a convenient way to shortcut to what God promised to give you. And it will be like that in your life. Whenever your life falls in line with the life of God, and you're plugging along, and you're finally starting to catch some traction, right? You're finally starting to make some progress. The enemy will always come along with a more convenient way for you to reach your goals. But if you follow that convenient way, to do that, you'll have to step out of line with the Word of God. He'll try to get you to compromise your convictions for convenience. That's exactly what Potiphar's wife was trying to do. Give you a convenient way to win in the eyes of the world. But to do that, you have to move yourself out of line with the Word of God. Verse number 11, "But one day, when he went into the house to do his work, and none of the men of the house was there in the house, she caught him by his garment, saying, 'Lie with me.' But he left his garment in her hand and fled and got out of the house. And as soon as she saw that he had left his garment in her hand and had fled out of the house, she called to the men of her household and said to them, 'See, he has brought among us a Hebrew to laugh at us. He came in to lie with me, and I cried out in a loud voice. As soon as he heard that I lifted up my voice and cried out, he left his garment beside me and fled and got out of the house.' Then she laid up his garment by her until his master came home, and she told him the same story, saying, 'The Hebrew servant who you have brought among us came in to me to laugh at me.' Verse number 18, 'But as soon as I lifted up my voice and cried, he left his garment beside me and fled out of the house. And as soon as his master heard the words that his wife spoke to him, 'This is the way your servant treated me,' his anger was kindled. And Joseph's master took him and put him into prison, the place where the king's prisoners were confined, and he was there in prison." There is so much that we could talk about in those verses, right? There's a whole series of messages just in those verses. One of the things is this: when you put up boundaries with people who don't like boundaries, they'll usually get angry. And if you've never experienced that, putting up a boundary in front of someone, it's probably because you don't have proper boundaries yourself. When you put up a boundary with someone who does not like to have boundaries, they want to be able to move in and out of your business at free will. When you put that boundary up, their natural reaction to that boundary is that they are going to be mad at you. That's exactly what we see with Joseph. Joseph put up a boundary between him and Potiphar's wife, and it caused her to be angry. There's a reason that we have so many in-law jokes, right? There's a reason that you can say mother-in-law, and everybody just kind of go, right? It's because so many of those jokes are based on the truth of boundary issues. We're called to leave our father and our mother, and hold tight to our spouse. Mom and dad, for us, that means that when baby girl and baby boy move on and they get married, that they're now clinging to their spouse. That means that you do not have any business in their household. Not that you can't go and visit, you know what I'm saying. You don't have any business meddling in their household. Also, son and daughter, when you leave and you go and cling to a husband or cling to a wife, what this means is you have to put up an appropriate boundary between you and mom and dad. And every time that you and new husband or you and new wife get in a fight, you don't run back to mom and dad and tell everything that went on during that fight. Here's why. Because you're going to forgive him tomorrow, but your dad will not forgive him for another 10 years. And you're going to be sitting at Thanksgiving dinner a decade later, and dad's still going to be looking at him crooked-eyed for what he said to you 1 month after you got married. You got to put up appropriate boundaries. But when you put up boundaries with people who don't like boundaries, they're going to get angry. You just got to do it anyway. You have to put up appropriate boundaries. There's also the truth that people in life are going to lie about you. And when they do, there will be times in life where that lie actually does hurt you. It hurt Joseph. Joseph was doing the right thing. Joseph was living upright. Joseph was living righteous in the eyes of God. And Potiphar's wife lied about him, and it caused him pain. But get this, my job is not to defend myself against someone else's lies. I want you to get that. My job is not to defend myself against someone else's lies. God will take care of that. God will defend his children just like I would defend my children, and plus some. Let's be sure that we're not so busy defending ourselves that we fail to leave room for God to be our defense. Joseph was innocent. And if you know the end of the story of Joseph, Joseph's going to go on here in a couple minutes. We're going to read about it. But Joseph's going to go on to be the second most powerful person, the second most powerful man in all of Egypt. But you know what we never find in the Bible? We never find Joseph going back to Potiphar and Potiphar's wife. Now that he's the second most powerful man, only behind Pharaoh, we never find him going back and said, what you did was wrong. What you did was a lie. And for that lie, you're going to go to prison just like you had me thrown into prison. And he could have done it. But we have to learn how to leave the liars and the haters in the past and let them live back there and not continue to try to make things right on our own. It's not our job to defend ourselves against other people's attacks and against other people's lies. This is what the Bible says. This isn't what Pastor Ryan says. This is what the Bible says. Romans 12, 19 through 21. Beloved, never avenge yourselves. He's pretty clear. Never avenge yourselves, but leave it to the wrath of God. For it is written, vengeance is mine, I will repay, says the Lord. To the contrary, so not only are you not going to avenge yourself, to the contrary, if your enemy is hungry, feed him. If he's thirsty, give him something to drink, for by doing so you will heap burning coals onto his head. Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. It's not my responsibility to defend myself when people attack me. God is more than capable of defending his children. If you want to win in life, you got to learn how to leave those people in the past. Let God be God and move on. Verse number 21. Let's go back to Genesis. Verse number 21. But the Lord was with Joseph and showed him steadfast love and gave him favor in the sight of the keeper of the prison. So now this is in prison. And the keeper of the prison put Joseph in charge of all the prisoners who were in the prison. Whatever was done there, he was the one who did it. The keeper of the prison paid no attention to anything that was in Joseph's charge, because the Lord was with him, and whatever he did, the Lord made it successful. Are you starting to see a pattern form in the life of Joseph? Everything that is attached to Joseph wins. No matter what circumstance, no matter what situation, everything. Whenever he was in Potiphar's house, the Bible says that God blessed Potiphar's house. Why? Not because of Potiphar, but because Joseph was attached to the house of Potiphar. He lived there, so God blessed it. Everything that was attached to Joseph in that season, Potiphar, everything won. Joseph gets thrown into prison. Everything that's attached to Joseph begins to win in prison. So much so that the person who was the keeper of the prison turned over running the prison to one of the prisoners. In every season, Joseph is winning. Again, according to the world's view of what winning looks like, slavery and prison probably do not make the list. If we're playing the board game of life and we land in jail, or we're sold by our brothers into slavery, we're probably going to look at those as major setbacks. But those weren't setbacks in the life of Joseph, and we're going to find out why here in just a minute. Joseph was living his best life, and everything that was attached to Joseph was winning, no matter what situation he found himself in. Now we're going to jump down to the end of Joseph's story this morning. He comes out of prison because he interprets a dream that Pharaoh has. And I want us to see three things very quickly that Joseph brings out of the pit that his brothers put him in. They threw him down in a pit before they sold him into slavery. His time in the house of Potiphar as a slave, and his time in the prison where he went because he was lied about. I want you to see this because I want you to know that you can win in life no matter what circumstances you find yourself in. Even when the circumstances are less than ideal, you can still win in life. Even when life is not fair, you can still be on the winning side. So let's take a look. Three things really quickly that Joseph did. Genesis 41, 37 through 45. Genesis 41, 37 through 45. This proposal pleased Pharaoh and all his servants. And Pharaoh said to his servants, "Can we find a man like this in whom is the Spirit of God?" Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, "Since God has shown you all of this, there is none so discerning and wise as you are. You shall be over my house, and all my people shall order themselves as you command. Only as regards the throne will I be greater than you." And Pharaoh said to Joseph, "See, I have set you over all the land of Egypt." Then Pharaoh took his signet ring from his hand and put it on Joseph's hand, and clothed him in garments of fine linen, and put a gold chain around his neck. Verse 43, and he made him ride in his second chariot, and they called out before him, "Bow the knee." Thus he set himself over all the land of Egypt. Moreover, Pharaoh said to Joseph, "I am Pharaoh, and without your consent no one shall lift up hand or foot in all the land of Egypt." Genesis 45, verses 4 through 11. Again, we're jumping on through the story a little bit. Joseph has reconnected with his brothers, but to this point, his brothers don't know who he is. So Joseph said to his brothers, "Come near to me." This is verse 4. So Joseph said to his brothers, "Come near to me, please." And they came near. And he said, "I am your brother Joseph, whom you sold into Egypt. And now do not be distressed or angry with yourselves, because you sold me here. For God sent me before you to preserve life. For the famine has been in the land these 2 years. And there are yet 5 years in which there will be neither plowing nor harvest. And God sent me before you." Man, look at that perspective. And God sent me before you. What is he saying? He's saying, you sold me into slavery, but I don't want you to be worried about it. Even though I have all the power to do whatever I want with you, you sold me into slavery, but you didn't actually do it. Actually, God sent me here ahead of you, and even though you sold me out, you sold me into slavery, God sent me ahead so that I could save your life. Look at the perspective that Joseph has. God sent me before you to preserve for you a remnant on earth and to keep alive for you many survivors. So it was not you who sent me here, but God. He has made me a father to Pharaoh and a lord of all his house and a ruler over all the land of Egypt. Hurry and go up to my father and say to him, thus says your son Joseph, God has made me lord of all of Egypt. Come down to me, do not tarry. You shall dwell in the land of Goshen. This is verse 10. You shall dwell in the land of Goshen, and you shall be near me, you and your children and your children's children, and your flocks and herds and all that you have. There I will provide for you, for there are yet 5 years of famine to come, so that you and your household and all that you have do not come to poverty. Wow. I want to be like Joseph when I grow up. Whenever I was growing up and playing sports, I would hear people say all the time, it's not if you win or lose. Have you ever heard anybody say this? It's not if you win or lose, it's how you play the game. And if no one has ever told you this before, that is absolutely absurd. It is if you win or lose. What are we talking about? Why are we playing the game if we're not trying to win or lose? We're going to keep score in my house. Whenever me and my boys play the game of life, Daddy's going to do his best to win. We're playing 6 years and under soccer right now. I'm coaching, me and Cammie are coaching, and Judah's on the team. We got 7 little kids on this team who are ages 3. We have one kid who's 3. Man. 3, 4, 5, and 6. And you know what they do at these games? They don't keep score. But you know who does keep score? This guy. So do you know what? We played 2 weeks. The first week, I kept score, and we won. And after the game, do you know what I told Judah when we were going back to the car? Hey, today we won. It was awesome. We had this many points, and they had this many points. Well, yesterday we played, and we didn't win. So do you know what I told Judah when we were going back to the car? Hey, you did your best. I love you, and I'm proud of the way that you played today. But today, we didn't win. I better not get into the parenting thing. You raise a generation of kids who don't know how to lose, and then when they go out into society and the life kicks them in the face the first time, they have no idea what to do with themselves because their whole life they've spent being told that they won even when they lost. It's okay to lose. But if I have any say about it, I'm going to win. It's not if you win or lose. Well, what's it about then? Maybe the truth of that phrase should be this. How you play the game often determines if you win or lose. It is about winning and losing, but how you play the game often determines if you win or lose. So, 3 things very quickly we're going to talk about how Joseph played the game of life. Number 1, he had his focus on God. In every situation, in every trial, every time that he was discarded, every time that he was abandoned, every time that he was lied about, every time he found himself in a bad place, and Joseph found himself in a lot of bad places and a lot of bad circumstances. Every single time, his focus was always on God. Never gave up on God. You can see that he continues to give God credit all throughout his life. If you want to be someone who wins in life, be someone who chooses not to blame God when life gets hard, but someone who worships God when he blesses you, even in the hard seasons. You can't win the game of life if you quit playing every time something doesn't go your way. And there will be things in life that don't go your way. Joseph always kept his focus on God. Number 2, he had the favor of God. Not only did he have his focus on God, but Joseph had the favor of God on his life. Over and over we see that in the life of Joseph. We see that he had favor in the eyes of men. And we have to understand that the reason that Joseph was favored in the eyes of men is because Joseph was favored in the eyes of God. Something that I pray over my family often is that they are favored by God, but that they're also favored by their friends, by their peers. When Danica was teaching, I used to pray over her every day. God, I pray today that Danica is favored by all of her peers, by all of her administration, by all of her students. I pray that she walks today in your undeniable favor over her life. We pray favor over our family. Joseph was put in every position of influence that he ever had in his life because he was favored by God. You can't win the game of life if you blame God for the bad and take credit for the good. You'll always lose that way. Number 3, he gained a godly perspective. Look at the end of his story. Joseph had a godly, eternal perspective. When he had an opportunity to take revenge on his brothers, he didn't. Not only did he choose grace over revenge, but he chose to bless and take care of the very people who betrayed him. That takes an eternal perspective. That takes a kingdom-mindedness that's going to take a lot of discipline and a lot of growth, because it is not natural to treat people well who've treated you poorly. But that's what we're called to do. You can't win the game of life unless you're willing to take an eternal perspective about what is happening in this life. If we're all being honest, it's really easy to get caught up in the rat race. We may not say it out loud, but our actions say that we're going through life like the purpose of the game is to get the most money. Like the purpose of the game that we're playing in life is to accumulate the most stuff and to build the most wealth. And again, please hear me. I'm not against money. I'm not against having nice things. I just don't want all of those things to have you. It's all about what perspective we take. It's so easy to get caught up in seeking after stuff, but that is not how we will win. We'll win when we have the same 3 things that Joseph had. That's a focus on God in every situation and every circumstance. Joseph always kept his focus on God. How can you know that? Because every time Joseph got put into a bad place, the people said, they looked at the life of Joseph and they said, God is with him. God is blessing him. Well, the only way they would know that is if Joseph was saying, this isn't about me, this is all about God. I was able to interpret this dream because God allowed me to do that. I know the right things and the wrong things, and I have wisdom and discernment, and that's a gift that I'm receiving from God. He kept his focus on God. He had the undeniable favor of God, and he had an eternal and godly perspective. Those 3 things, if we live our lives, that's how we play the game. And if we'll play the game the right way, we will win the game of life. Will you stand with me this morning?